And we'll welcome you here. We're so glad to have you, and we're so glad, I think Senator Osmond and Representative Cunningham get brownie points for being here early. And we believe that we'll be having a few more come later. They told us they were, but we planned this, like 6 months ago, or I think it was at least August. And of course, tonight, there are many things happening for legislators and many places for them to be. So we know others will come, but they will join us a little bit later. So we would like to turn some time over to Tracy, who is, this meeting is co-sponsored by PTA, Region 6 PTA. We'll turn some time over to Tracy.
Thank you. We really appreciate the district and working with us to put together this town hall, and these happen to be the two best legislators up at the Capitol. They're mine. We really appreciate them and the others who will be joining us, and appreciate everyone coming out. I'm just going to pass these around that has the list of all the legislators that represent at least parts of Georgia School District. And it's got the contact information, phone numbers, email addresses, and if you're not sure which one represents you, the website at the top of the page will just plug in your address, it'll pull up who represents you and their contact information. And just encourage you to contact your legislators. I know I'm getting hundreds of emails and hundreds of phone calls right now, but that's our job as the people, is to let them know what we think. So take the time to share your opinions with them. It's important to do so. And if you've gotten surveys in the mail from them, please fill them out and send them back in. It's important. They pay attention to their surveys. They keep track of that data. So take the time to do that and give your feedback to them. And then also at the bottom of the page, Utah PTA follows several bills and takes positions on some of the bills. And so if you're interested in finding out what PTA is following and what their position is, there's a link at the bottom that will give that information. So thank you.
Thank you. We just love our partner in PTA that helps us with so many things that we do. I just want to call attention to the fact that there are several board members here. So if you're a member of the board, raise your hand. So we've got, yes. And then I also want to call attention to, we have a member of our state school board here, Jefferson Moss. Jefferson, do you want to stand?
Sure.
I've been in meetings where people have said, how many know who your state board member is? And very few people raise their hand. And so if you live in the south half of Jordan School District, you can raise your hand. It's Jefferson Moss, and we're so glad to have him here with us tonight.
Can I add the north end of Brittany Cummins, but she just had a baby?
Yes.
So she has a good excuse why she's not here tonight.
She does have a good excuse. I talked to her and I told her about this meeting, and she said, please excuse her, but she would attend others.
Yep.
So I'm going to pass around a sheet of paper. You've probably seen, many of you have seen this before. You can put your name and address, and then if you do not get the emails that I sent out that let you know about the town hall meetings that we have, and you would like to, you can put your email address on here. Okay? All right. So we are going to turn the time over to, who wants to start? Rich, you want to start? To Representative Cunningham.
I did have a Korean guy that built a coat for me, and he did put Cunningham on the inside of my coat, so I have been called that as well. Do you care if we sit? Is that okay with you guys? Is that all right? Yes. All right. You know, I'm just starting my third session on the Hill, and it's this year, I will tell you, is a different feel entirely than it has been the first two. And I think it's because of some of the intense issues that we have right now, dealing with gas tax, sales tax, healthy Utah plan, not healthy Utah plan, partisan, nonpartisan elections, with the judge telling us that we need to get our act together on that issue, and then obviously the funding of education. I will tell you at the beginning it didn't help, and I've had this discussion with the governor when he comes out and tells us that we need to take money from transportation, as well as all of the surplus, the $640 million, and say I need it here, here, and here. And the challenge is when you have all the hands out here saying, well, we want some of this, some of this, some of us, So it's made it very difficult to deal with that issue right now, with what's going on. We had a 2-hour interesting debate in our Republican caucus just on Healthy Utah. Do we do it? We don't do it. The 3 different proposals that are out there. So, you know, if I look a little glazed, it's because there's just so many issues. But a couple of things that I'm doing just on, to let you know, I have a House Bill HB, it's the second substitute, HB 77. It's a post-retirement bill. The post-retirement bill came about because we have a real inefficiency of qualified workforce to help fill positions throughout the police, the chiefs, the fire, the police. Now we've had the public schools weigh in on this big time. We had a superintendent from the Nebo School District that just came in and just did an unbelievable job with that. And where the bill stands right now, because we're trying to find out, do we hire people back that have left the system and come in? And where the bill stands, we have gone to a full task force. And the reason we've gone to a task force is I received 4 different conflicting data from the Utah retirement systems. When the bill was written, URS was supposed to track how a post-retirement, when somebody leaves and comes back into the system, will affect us. And since 2010, we've had 0 tracking by our Utah retirement systems. And that's hence, I think, the 4 different sets of information that we've gotten. My background is in financial services, retirement pension planning, so I've been kind of the designee to take on some of those issues. So if you see a lot of the retirement issues, they're all coming my way because of that. And so we have a real inefficiency with some positions throughout the entire state. I know we have them in this school district, and my belief is based on one thing. My dad taught school for 36 years, and when he retired, after about 6 months, he says, you know what, I'd like to go back and use my qualifications, but under the Utah retirement codes and those things, we don't allow that to happen. And I think it's a poor resource when we have spent thousands of dollars educating people in the public sector to not be able to use their qualifications, because we can't even use a highway patrolman who's qualified. We spent thousands and tens of thousands of dollars to become a school cop, or go to Snow College as a cop, or become a bus driver or a school teacher. So we're trying to look the fair way, and until we get the data that's out there. A bill that Senator Osmond and I are running together as a local governing body. We had a situation in South Jordan that was not a good one. We fixed the bill. It did pass the Senate today unanimously in committee. And what it will not allow us to, unless you are being totally orderly, you cannot be kicked out of a public meeting. And that's even these meetings here, any of the elected officials. And what was interesting is, and when we got into it, and I know Senator and I didn't know that it got even to the school districts, that we had some challenges with some school board elected officials that were actually escorted out of a public meeting because they didn't agree with the pay salary of a superintendent. Not picking on you, superintendent, but it was kind of an interesting video watching some of the other things. But that is the one that will get that taken care of. But it's just kind of a cleanup bill to help with what's going on. As far as I sit on transportation and revenue and tax, and right now, as all of you have been reading in the paper, there are some major issues that are coming there. We have the bills before us. They're going to be vetted out on what we do with the gas tax. Do we do a sales tax? Do we a combination of both, or some of those things to take care of the inefficiencies that we've had? We've not had a gas tax increase since 1979. I kind of miss not being on the education committee, but they asked me to serve on these other committees because of a little bit of my background. So I'm not running a lot of bills. It's the couple that I've embarked upon are pretty much big time, full time, with just fighting some of the things that we're trying to get done. Out of 11,000 homes that I sent my flyer to, as of yesterday, I'd only received back 400 of them, and that went into my newsletter that just went out. So, but I will tell you, of the 11,000, or of the 400 I've got back, they are all over on what we ought to do. It's just a split about 30% in every direction as far as almost every issue that's out there. I mean, and I think yours are probably finding the one, but the one that was not was when we got to the partisan, nonpartisan. It was over 70% of the that I've got back in my surveys wanted nonpartisan that came out of just out of the South Jordan that I had received.
And that's
Go ahead.
for the state school board election.
That's the state
Is that
school
correct?
board. That is correct, state school board. And I'm not sure where the senators are at, but I can tell you that's where it is on mine. What I'd like to do is maybe take a few questions of questions that you have, because it may be the two of us, and I'm tired of talking. I had to debate a couple of bills today. We had the hands-free bill coming with distracted driving. We had the seatbelt bill that was, we debated both of those for about 45 minutes on the floor, one in the morning and then one in the afternoon. So the personal rights issues are, some big things that are going on right now. But I'd like to take some questions. What's that?
How did they turn out? What way did the vote go?
The distracted driving was circled. I don't think it'll come back this session. And the reason is we do not have enough data to go change it where a law just went into effect a year ago. The seatbelt passed through the House. I think it was 48, 20 some, right in there. So it passed on the seatbelt law that Representative Perry did pass.
Thank you.
So,
Any
questions? I'd be more than happy to ask them, and we can, between the two of us, we'll try to give it our best shot.
My name is James Mon. I teach at West Hills Middle.
Okay?
I have a question about charter schools, and I'm kind of referring to House Bill 119, which I believe is in the Senate Committee Education Committee now. This would significantly raise the amount of taxes in the district that go towards charter schools. What do you feel both is the purpose of charter schools?
What is the purpose?
Yes.
Well, I'll respond to that in two ways. The original purpose behind charter schools was to create a laboratory of innovation, a school infrastructure, a public school infrastructure that was free from many of the statutory restrictions and requirements that are placed on regular district schools. And, in some ways we've accomplished that, in other ways I don't think that we have. So that was the original intent. I think that what it has become, from a political perspective, is simply a reinforcement of parental choice in public education, having an option. I don't think it is really an innovation laboratory right now from my perspective. And we see just as many failing charter schools as we do failing regular district schools. And, I am intrigued by this conversation. I actually ran a bill that would have allowed our municipalities to be a chartering entity for charter schools. And the reaction that I got was surprising, actually, that there was so much concern, not just from my constituents, but from my colleagues, about what the future of charter schools should or should not be. And then the biggest issue came up, which is identified on this document, is what is the transparency of the way that we're funding charter schools in our state? It was quite a significant reaction from across the Senate.
You know what, Senator, I'm going to hand those documents out if that's all right with
Oh,
you.
yeah, this one?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
referring to them.
I'm just pointing out that it's on there, accountability and transparency of charter schools. So the bill failed in committee. It was a 50-50 split, so the bill failed. But what I committed to do was to be a part of a group that would really go deep on figuring out, okay, are we being transparent with how charter schools are funded? Are we being fair in how charter schools are being funded? Are we holding charter schools accountable in the same way that we do our other district schools? And are we accomplishing the purpose that we actually set out to achieve with charter schools in the first place? And I don't know the answers to those questions. So we're going to look at that more deeply during the interim this year.
Let me take it one step further on that. I do have another bill. It's a CTE task force bill. I've spent the last 2 years at the previous speaker's request to look at how our CTE programs have evolved and are evolving more in the state. and obviously this has a lot to do with charter schools as well, that will be part if the bill does pass out, because the resistance is unbelievable. What we are asking for is, are we getting the water to the end of the road with the CTE programs and the certificate and the accountability, both with our charter schools, with our traditional schools, with the ACTs, the applied technologies, because everybody wants their pound of flesh, and hey, don't touch my money is what I've pretty much been told, but that's not my attitude. For those of you that have got to know me, is you know what, it's a lot of money going, but if we're closing programs that shouldn't be closed in certain areas, and do we have the right programs in certain areas based on the growth? The governor is behind this. We're doing it out of workforce service, and economic development is where it will be housed with GoEd. Because the statistics prove that 70% of our kids are not going to be our STEM children. I was not a STEM child. I was a product of learning how to weld in high school. I learned how to weld, and then from there, I decided to go back to school, and I went on and did a lot of other things. But the fact is, parents can't save enough money to put your kids in school. The scholarships are not there like they used to be. We want to make sure that we are getting it. So this CTE program will address also the charter schools. We have a applied technology school that just started their own charter school. And it's, you know, a football field away from a high school. And we want to know that. Are we getting that right as a taxpayer, the transparency, and those kind of things. But obviously you can imagine, ever since the resistance is out there, but there's a good quote in the movie, you know, resistance is what? Futile, okay? I think you as a taxpayer, me as a taxpayer, I want to make sure that my money's getting there, and all of your children have that opportunity at whatever they want to become. And we are creating at times, because my first 2 years has been STEM, 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 STEM. And I love the STEM program, and we've got the money going to the STEM programs, and we've left some of the other programs out. The other thing is when we close the CTE program, a sewing class, for example, where does the inventory go? We don't have even an inventory for the entire state of where it is all at. Because if Jordan wants the sewing program and Murray shuts it down, why don't we coordinate some of this versus just putting it on the surplus and we sell it out to there? So this is a big deal for all of us with what we want to do. Go ahead.
Question back there and then up here, sorry.
Except from past Representative Byrd, there are no questions allowed, because we're going to say no.
Okay.
Go ahead.
HB 290, two questions. HB 290 just passed Business and Labor this morning in the House, or this afternoon. I'm wondering when it gets to the floor and to the Senate, where will each of you
Will
be
you
on that bill?
give them the description of the bill?
This is breaking the automobile bubble of 15 miles, and there's been some work with that, which would allow dealerships to come into the west side of the Salt Lake Valley, an issue that I started last year and didn't have the opportunity to complete. That would be my first question. My second question is, there's been talk about doing away with SAGE testing. Would you go into some degree into that and tell us where you're at in that regard?
Well, I'll just first respond to HB 290. I haven't yet seen the bill, so.
I have. I've been involved in the negotiation past representative since you left. I believe the compromise is there with West Jordan and some of the other cities. Does it get us where we want? No, but I will tell you, from the compromise from the auto dealers and the manufacturers, I think it's better than what we had. And I think over the next few years, it's going to change again, as you and I have discussed. So I've been in the middle of it. So thanks, Representative Byrd, for putting that headache on me. But it needs to get there. We need to fix it.
I just want to make sure everyone understands what it is. So just really quickly, the challenge that we have is that in our state statute, we have allowed or empowered dealerships to decide whether or not a new dealership can or cannot come in. So you have the competition deciding if more competition will be let or not let into an area. From my perspective, that is unacceptable. And I can't even believe that we ever passed it in our state. So I fully support any effort to eliminate that kind of monopolistic type of approach to commerce. The biggest impact is to West Jordan and other cities that are unable to put dealerships in because under the rules, under the state statute, they can't do it without permission from the other dealers who don't want new competition brought into the market. This bill addresses that, and I support it. Let me just address SAGE testing. How many of you are aware of what SAGE testing is, just by raising hands? Okay.
Anybody not?
Yeah. Okay. So
How many of you are teachers, by the way, that are here? Great, thank you.
I just want to articulate that, you know, the intent behind SAGE testing was for our state to be able to assess students in a way that we could compare the performance, the academic performance of students across the state. And that goal has power in it, because there is an ability for us to be able to say, District A is not performing as well as District B. The challenge that we have with SAGE testing is that it's tied to a very politically divisive topic, which is called the Common Core. Now in Utah, we call it the Utah State Core, which is a set of standards associated with academic levels that we expect our students to reach. Personally, I don't have a problem with standards. I don't have a problem with us establishing those standards. The concern is, by many of our constituents, especially out here and in places in Utah County and in other key, very conservative districts, is that there is great anxiety that the Common Core is influenced by out-of-state special interests, including the federal government. That's the perception. Now, there are some unique issues and challenges around that we can spend hours debating and discussing. But the problem is that SAGE testing is tied to that. And there's anxiety from a state perspective. There's great anxiety that the use of those tests, which were developed by a company called AIR, in some way is going to introduce more of the concepts and concerns that people are worried about relative to Common Core. So that's the big picture. I personally believe in standardized testing and support computer-based assessment and support adaptive testing concepts. They work. But the politics related to it right now are very challenging. So my approach to this, Representative, is let's let the parents make the decision if their kids will or will not participate in that testing. That's my approach. I don't believe that we should eliminate SAGE testing altogether. I believe that parents should have the right to make the decision whether or not they do participate. And that there shouldn't be penalties or benefits by participating or not participating in SAGE testing. And that it's a personal choice on behalf of the parent. From an academic perspective, here's the challenge. For those parents that opt their kids out of this testing, it's very difficult for a teacher to assess whether or not their student is making adequate academic progress. That many of our teachers are now using the SAGE assessment model as the formative or kind of the mid or interim assessment tool, because they have no other tool to use. So students that are opted out of all of that testing are often, it's a challenge for teachers to know where they are academically. So I want to make sure parents understand that issue, but also understand that I believe strongly that parents ought to be given the right to choose, the right to decide whether or not they participate in a state-mandated testing system. If it's locally developed, I think they ought to be participating. But if it's a state-mandated system relative to the Utah Core, I think parents ought to have that choice. That's my personal standing.
So does that mean when it comes to the floor of the Senate and Senator Stevenson brings it there, you'll vote no?
I would vote no to get rid of the SAGE testing. But I'm bringing forth a bill which is already public. It's an amendment to my parental rights bill from last year that dramatically increases the rights of parents and protects parents relative to their choices on this issue. So while we should, and I believe ought to continue having the state assessment system, we ought to enable parents to make the choice if they like it or not. Oh, sorry, didn't see your hand.
You know, I think that as a teacher over the last 20 years, what I can tell you is that I don't need a standardized assessment to tell me where my students are. I know exactly where they are. I know more about that student than any one of those tests will ever tell you. Just because you can't measure it doesn't mean that I don't know. So I want to disagree.
Fair.
I want to disagree with that because it has nothing to do with what happens in the classroom. In the classroom, I know those kids. I know where they're at. I know who's struggling. I know who needs beyond what I'm offering. And I disagree.
That's fair, and in fairness, I want you to know that teachers are divided on this. I talk to many teachers who completely disagree with that statement. So it is a very divisive issue, and there's no easy political answer, but I think it comes down to enabling local control, and the most local control, from my perspective, is the parent.
You know, truthfully, it's a morale killer for us. I mean, I personally have spent hundreds of hours preparing teachers for SAGE testing, even more preparing kids. Our whole PLC, professional learning communities, are built around SAGE testing. It is sad to go down a road, partway down the road, and we do CRTs and we back up the truck, and then we go down the road and we do SAGE testing and we back up the truck. Please give us consistency. I beg you to give us consistency. I'm not afraid of accountability. I'm very transparent. I will tell you exactly where Copper Hill sits, and I'm not going to give you excuses for the B that we have. We'll do better, but please give us consistency.
Young lady, it's yours.
Yeah, I think I had a comment initially with the charter school, and then, but also with the SAGE testing, and I think what I would like addressed is that from the public, we do want more local control as teachers and parents, and you're seeing that with people wanting their kids in charter schools because you feel that parental control. And I think that to me, it's sad as a teacher because our schools are set up with that you have a classroom teacher, and then you have a team of teachers, and you have a principal, and you have local control already built in. And then you have these charter schools outside of it where they're free from those restrictions. Well, the school within the school district didn't put those restrictions on us. We didn't put on your kid has to be here, and you have to take an end of the year test in February, and all these things that are coming down. Our hands are being tied, and I've never felt more in my short teaching career that my wings are ever so clipped with more and more of the bills that get passed and the restrictions that come down that funnel down on us. And I would like to know, how could we get some of that local control back that's already naturally built into it? That makes sense, that how there's so much common sense that's just totally thrown out the window. I mean, literally, we're taking end-of-year tests in February. And as a teacher, when I get my students going, it's like getting a train started. And some of my kids are going the wrong direction. And it takes time to stop that train, to get it going, and to build a team. And just as I'm building a team, now we're stopping? Let me test that last week in June. Let me test that last. Then you'll see some progress.
I'd be curious what the district thinks about that, in terms of doing those tests later. I'm more here to listen, to be honest, but I'd love any input in terms of the logistics of doing that.
I think the logistics.
I'm happy to take anything back.
Yeah, well, I think the logistics play a big part of it because you only have so many, we don't have one-to-one devices. And the number of computers that we have in a school limit how the testing is done. One school I was in recently, they said their computer labs would be busy from now till the middle of May or the end of May, just because of testing. And you couldn't have any other option there.
That seems like what we want our kids in. Is that like the education we're all really excited about?
No, in fact, if I can just make a comment on this. We have several governing bodies. Governing body number one is the legislature, and our primary role really is about funding.
Should we go there?
Yes, we should. I'm putting
Hey,
myself out
just
there.
by a way of conflict of interest, did you and my wife talk about that same subject last night? He teaches, and I hear it.
So we'll come back to that issue, okay? We'll come back. Then we have the State Board of Education, which is responsible for the general supervision and control of public education, and making decisions about our standards and the testing that we do and the timing of that testing. Then we have the local districts, which try to implement everything from above.
And the teachers, don't forget about us.
I know that.
And we're graduating
You guys, you are literally where the rubber meets the road and where all of this conflict happens. So I just want to identify that I agree with that issue. And I also want to make it clear, charter schools and regular public district schools are facing the same challenge with SAGE testing. They have the same responsibility, the same timing of this test. This is an issue that is affecting every public school, not just district schools.
But I do think, there's a point, and that you said it, like, that it's kind of it's a parental choice. That we all want more choice and even control, and I think where is what's happening in that? And I think also, I've been in contact with some of my other representatives, and I keep hearing that, well, we do the lawmaking, but this person's in charge of licensure, and this person's in charge of this. I think there needs to be more cohesiveness. What does this really look like when it hits the kids? What does this really look like when it hits the school? Because I'm kind of tired of that answer. Like, what, make it work?
I'll add a couple things into that. One, I would say our new superintendent has been addressing this very issue. Brad Smith, very shortly on the job, was saying how frustrated he was because he was a district superintendent, and he was saying, I'm getting this data and it's already outdated. I'm getting it so far past the timeliness of it, as you just mentioned. That was another frustration. Now, I will say we are driven by mandates from the legislature to provide testing. So even though we administer the testing, there is also an element of the legislature saying we
Public school, and I put them in a charter school, and I will say, not that charter schools aren't public, but parents have a much bigger voice in a public school than they do in a charter school. It's kind of my way or the highway. You don't fit into their mold, you question them. As far as I know, all their board meetings are closed door. You don't really get a say. You get to hear. I felt very unempowered, and I have to say with the new administration and the direction that the school board is going in Jordan School District, I feel much more empowered than I did 15 years ago. Much more empowered. And maybe it's because I kind of, you guys all know me, I've made my voice heard, but I feel like I know people that I can talk to, and then if I had an issue, I don't know. I just think if parents say they don't feel empowered, then they haven't tried. Thank you. And, well, and is this only education questions, or do we have other questions?
Well, we can do other questions, but first I'm going to introduce Senator Stevenson, who's joined us. We're so glad you're here, Senator. And we have a little smaller group. I guess there's a lot of activity on the Hill tonight. So we're a little more informal than we have been in the past, but each of our legislators would take 15 minutes, and then it's been a lot of questions. But I'm going to go back to Senator Osmond to actually talk about a couple of your pieces of legislation, and then we'll let Senator Stevenson.
We haven't heard of the legislation yet?
Not
Which
really.
one? The
Not
good
quite.
stuff.
the good stuff.
Leave all the other stuff out. Sorry.
I just really wanted to talk about one piece of legislation that I think is really important, and that is the concept of property tax equalization. And for those of you that don't understand this issue, our state is facing a real challenge on a local property tax level. We have some districts, in fact, half of our districts, that are below the state average and below the amount of revenue from a local property tax perspective that we guarantee to our charter schools. So we say to our charter schools, look, you're not a taxing entity. So we're going to guarantee you $1,746 per student because you can't generate tax revenue. But then half of our school districts are below that. We have districts like, for example, South Sanpete, that is generating about $1,400 in tax revenue per student, and then districts like Park City that are generating over $6,500. Now, the problem with that is that we as a legislature set those boundaries, and the people will live where they live. We have districts with very high tax rates. Jordan is up there from a tax rate perspective. But we generate very little revenue on a per student basis to meet our needs. And when you think that 40%, when you know that 40% of the revenue that we need to fund our local schools comes from local property taxes, this is a big issue, especially when it comes to dealing with growth like the Jordan School District is. So today in the Senate, we passed out a bill that would increase revenue for public education through the state basic rate, which is the state property tax rate. It would generate $75 million for us to be able to then turn that money and put it back into existing statutory programs that fund our local school districts on an equalized basis. Jordan would be a beneficiary of that in a significant way, both in our operational revenues as well as our capital revenue to help us build buildings. Now, it's not the end-all be-all. These equalization laws require that we have a certain level of taxing equity in order for us to benefit. So we have to do our part from a Jordan School District perspective. But the fact that it passed second reading today on a vote of 22-7, knowing, and Senator Stevenson could not have done a better job making sure that my colleagues understood this was a tax increase. Knowing, and he voted for it, by the way. It was a very, very powerful support from Senator Stevenson. The fact that we got it through second reading with that kind of support means that the Senate understands the inequity of this situation and that we do need to solve it. I'm encouraged by it because that $75 million is about exactly what we need to bring every school district up to about the same level of funding that we provide to our charter schools. And that is new money in education. It's not taking existing money and moving it over here. It's new money in education. Now, we still have to get it through the House, and the House is a very challenging body.
I'm for it,
Thank goodness.
just so you know, I've been for it.
But I need to make it clear that the battle's not over. We have a lot of work to do, and it will. But I think that the argument of inequity is a very powerful one, and one that over the last 3 years I've worked closely with Senator Stevenson to communicate this issue. I think that the legislature is getting it, and we have a solution that we will hopefully will pass through the entire legislature. So I don't know if you have any questions about that, but that's really what I wanted to talk about and make sure that my constituents here in the Jordan School District understood that progress that we've made together.
What's the bill number?
It's SB 97, Property Tax Equalization. You can look it up. I've also got several videos and PowerPoint presentations explaining it. If you'd like to look on the senatesite.com, you can find more information about that and give you feedback if you have it. That's it for me. Senator Stevens.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. Sometimes your brain up there just turns to mush, and you almost start to babble. Of course, some people would say that's what we always do. I'm pleased to support Senator Osmond's bill because I think it's what's right. As you know, when I ran for the legislature, I had been working for the Utah Taxpayers Association for 14 years before that. And when the board of directors of the Taxpayers Association, which basically fights taxes and tries to get people $1 of services for every $1 of taxes, when they agreed to let me take a leave of absence during the legislative session and serve in the legislature if I was elected, they made it very clear to me that my ethical responsibility was to build my conscience and to represent my constituents, not the Taxpayers Association. And I thought that was such a breath of fresh air for me to know that I could go to that legislature if I was elected and do that instead of feel that I had to do what my employer wanted me to do. And I've appreciated that, and this year, the Taxpayers Association is opposing Senator Osmond's bill, but I am strongly supporting it and helping him to get it through, and hopefully we'll be able to have similar success in the House to what we did today in the Senate. I'm hoping that before I pass it on third reading, we can include some features in it that will ensure that we continue to build the capital outlay support for districts like Jordan that have all of the growth, but very little of the tax base, and also for the voted and board leeway so that we can continue to bring those amounts up so that if taxpayers in a particular district impose a certain tax rate on themselves, they know that they will have the same number of dollars generated from that tax effort that every other school district in the state collects. You know, with statehood, we agreed that we would have a publicly supported education system. And whether you like government education or not, that's what we have. And we've done our best to educate all of the children where they exist by taxing the resources where they exist in the state. But unfortunately, the legislature hasn't been completely fair in ensuring that there's those equal opportunities in the entire educational funding formula. We have the equalization in the basic program, which is the bulk of it. But then you have the local property tax that is optional with the local school board. And the voters, sometimes they turn it to the voters to see if you would like to approve a vote leeway or a bond. Unfortunately, we have such a disparity in the amount of taxable value per student from district to district. Park City is the highest. First of all, they have those $1 million homes with very few children. And on top of that, those homes are taxed as if they were commercial property, whereas a primary residence is taxed at just 55% of its value. So there's a huge difference there. So they have all of this tax wealth and a very low tax rate. The tax rate in Park City is, we would love to have that. It's less than half of the tax rate in Jordan District. Well, but we have a statewide education system, and therefore the wealth to educate each child should be roughly the same, depending on the decisions to impose taxes. But we did a chart. I had my interns do a chart that you'll be interested in seeing this, Senator Osmond, because it really validates what you're doing. If we were to look at the difference between the tax revenue per pupil in, not Park City, because that's so far in the stratosphere, it's not fair to compare it to that. But if we just take the next one, which is Rich School District, funny name for one of the riches.
I don't have any trouble with that.
They are, yeah, they have $5,700 per student in just local property tax. You know how much Jordan does? $1,400. So if you take the difference between Rich School District and Jordan, Rich School District has almost $4,300 per student more to spend because of the differential in the tax base. And they also have a low tax rate. If they had the same tax rate as we do in Jordan, they would be probably $1,500 per student, $15,000 per student. It's just obscene what the legislature has created. So Cash is the worst off, and their difference is $4,500 difference between them and Rich. Now, who created that inequity? Pardon me?
I said Cache County and Rich County aren't they adjacent?
Right, right adjacent, but one is a veteran community with farms that have green belt, so the taxes are almost nothing on a farm. And Rich has all those $1 million homes around Bear Lake. So you have all of that wealth. Who did this? Who created this inequity? It was the legislature. And every year the legislature persists because we have a hard time saying, well, we're going to play Robin Hood. We're going to have winners and losers. Well, who's the loser now? Annually. Nobody ever talks about the fact that Jordan District is losing $4,300 a year. Why don't we talk about that inequity? You know, what I've learned through this process is that equity is an orphan. It has no parents. It has nobody to advocate for it. But when you talk about changing from one district to the other, everybody starts screaming. Well, what about $4,300 difference when we're talking about in your bill, the amount that we're actually imposing on all the districts through the 75 million, some of them are gonna be losing maybe $7 per student. And we're talking about $4,300 per student? I hope the point is clear, that what we have is inequity. And I looked it up, the etymology, the origin of the word inequity is exactly the same as iniquity. They're the same origin. And if we don't have the courage as legislators to stop the evil of this discrimination against some children versus others, we don't deserve to be in public office.
Thank you, Senator. Oh, yeah, do you have a question about this?
No, just a comment.
Okay, please, go ahead.
Not on that,
Go ahead.
I'm probably the oldest veteran in here. I'm announced my retirement after 40 years. I just have 3 observations. Senator Stevenson, you and I have disagreed with a lot of stuff over the years, even when I was working at Alpha and your issue to eliminate SAGE testing, push it. I endorse it 100%. It's a burden on us teachers that, quite frankly, is inappropriate. We are perfectly capable at the local level of generating standards and monitoring and plotting our own students' progress. Opting the parents out, it's band-aid. Get rid of the program. Now, second, Mr. Kornberg talked about consistency. In my 40-year run, I have never had an attendance policy that lasted more than 3 years. I've never had a district-mandated collaboration program that didn't change every 3 years. I cannot identify a single program that I have been asked to handle as a teacher that had a lifespan greater than 3 years in anything we've ever done. We need to have predictability and consistency if we're going to track this. And the third comment, and this one is a little selfish, it's not a money issue. I drafted a letter to my own representative, my own Senator Harper. He hasn't gotten it yet. I'd like to paraphrase it for you. We teachers want our dignity back. One of the most frustrating things in the world is to wake up every morning and read in the newspaper that the legislators are castigating us, that the failure of children in America is on our backs. It isn't. I can't count the number of times parents, teachers, students have hugged each other, applauded each other's efforts, only to read that the legislature, individual legislators, are standing up and castigating everything we do. I don't care if I earn it 100 times because I'm retired, but I don't care what you do to the pay scale. Just start saying nice things about us. Now, I admit that's a little selfish, maybe it's self-serving. Let me give you my primary example. We had a student teacher in this building who in the first week of school gave the citizenship test for naturalization in a government class the first week as a pre-test. A student failed it, as one would expect of a pre-test. He went home, told his parents, they called KSL, we ended up on the news, our students are stupid. We started to hear legislators calling for a civics test based on that test. When I called Bethesda News and said it's a pre-test, they didn't care. I'm frustrated that not one single person from the media or the legislature ever contacted Copper Hills High School and asked what are the results of the post-test. Please give us back our dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. That was powerful and important. I want to talk about the testing. I'm part of National Conference of State Legislatures International Task Force. We are looking at the countries on the PISA, the International Report Card of countries. Those countries that have the highest scores on the educational report card. And there's one thing that they all have in common, even though they have different cultures, all different things that make up their countries. The one thing of their educational system that is common is that not a single one of them have high stakes end of level tests. Not a single one of them. They don't see value in it. What they do have is high training levels for teachers and high respect for teachers and requirements for students to be compliant with the teacher. One of the reasons that I want to get rid of the SAGE test and all these end-of-level tests is that right now, in February, we're giving end-of-level writing assessments. Here it is. Maybe you've already talked about that. It's ridiculous. And the very computers that are supposed to be used for the instructional program are now monopolized with testing all day, every day, till the rest of the year. This is absurd. And we do have a bill this year that Representative Francis Gibson and I are sponsoring to provide schools one-to-one devices. The legislature will provide a portion of the money if schools agree to repurpose some of the money that they would have used for textbooks and other purposes and use it for that. But it requires, so that will take care of some of it, but still we ought to be getting rid of the end-of-level test, because in today's world, we can certify mastery at any time in the year. It's quite possible to certify that mastery at any time of the year. So when that child becomes mastery at fractions and these kinds of concepts, we certify it at that time, and it becomes stackable so that by the end of the year, you have certified mastery in the entire math curriculum for that grade level or that subject. You don't have to have an autopsy at the end of the year. That isn't even counted toward the student's grade, so therefore its authenticity is just throw it to the wind, because when the kids ask, is this going to count on my grade? It makes a difference in how much they try. And so we now judge teachers based on a test that doesn't even count on grade. So I agree 100%. And I have 19 teachers in my extended family, including cousins, uncles and aunts, my mother and siblings. I've never known anybody who has more than that in their family. And I have to tell you that we do need to respect teachers. I don't know if any of you have ever read the books by Daniel Pink. His first real well-known one is Drive, which shows the intrinsic motivation that really drives us as humans. It's the reason that League of Legends is a free computer game, is sweeping the world. And the people who are building that, the people who build the soundtrack for that, the musical themes behind it, you ought to see these young people, these millennials who are just getting together and creating stuff that is superior to any musical compositions in the history of the world, because they collaborate rather than the single composer in previous centuries who would just isolate themselves and they would be the single genius. Now we're having people who are collaborating and doing all of these amazing things and writing the code and all of that. Whoever would have thought that Wikipedia would put Encarta out of business? Encarta was that multi-billion-dollar online encyclopedia that Bill Gates created, and he had to shut it down because people were going to Wikipedia instead because it was free and it had value in it, and it didn't cost anything to create because people are intrinsically motivated. Well, teachers are the most intrinsically motivated people I know. They're here because they want to make a difference in the lives of children. They want to create the future. That's who they are. And they do deserve the respect you're asking for. And sometimes when we get critical of the status quo, critical of the system, sometimes I misspeak. And I apologize for that. Because I'm not speaking against teachers in particular. What I'm speaking against is a system that doesn't show that respect. This year we've got a bill that will create a pilot program for a third semester program where teachers will make 50% more if they choose to teach 50% more students through a third semester instead of the 2-semester system we have now. Students would be given a virtual semester in one of those 3, and all students would graduate with a certificate and an associate's degree, and it wouldn't cost significantly more than we're currently spending. And yet we could start teachers at $50,000 a year instead of $35,000 with no cost to taxpayers. So I'm hoping that we can get this pilot program going and see if there are some schools that would like to try that.
Sir, I think my biggest concern, I like what you're talking, truly, the move, the talk about starting teachers at $50,000, I can tell you, I can't keep it. The way to build good programs is teachers. My most successful programs here, my highest math scores are from quality teachers. I hired 25 new teachers last year in this building because of turnover and leave. I've already had 13 teachers resign this year. There are 4 districts and Summit Academy fighting right now for 1 physics teacher that I interviewed Friday. And that interview turned quickly from us interviewing her to her interviewing us to see where she was going to go. I can't keep teachers. Dan and Yogurt, I met with them. They come in and want to talk about CTE programs. They want to interview if we have any students that are interested in the training, the mechanics to work in Denver. He says our starting salary is $60,000. The lady there's name is Sherry Lund. Please call her. And I said, I don't, but guess what? My technology teacher is now looking at that position.
Of course.
No, that's the truth.
We can't compete unless we change what we're doing.
Of all the concerns in education right now, I as a principal, it is hiring and keeping staff. And I don't know that even our district understands the turnover in teaching. 25 last year, 13 already this year.
And especially the STEM-related teachers, math, science,
And
computer
CTE.
science,
Yeah.
CTE. Yeah, and so we've got a bill this year
Special
to
ed.
start to increase the differential pay for math, science, and engineering.
Which is interesting. However, now I have biology teachers and so forth moving out of wanting to move from biology into physics. So teachers are starting to move and jockey out of the...
Well, biology counts.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because that's been a hot discussion in our building.
Yeah, it's not just physical science. At least that's my understanding. So I'd like to talk to you about that. I don't want to monopolize this.
Yeah, we should let, we had Representative Tanner come, and so we want to give him a couple of minutes too. And then these are such great discussions. I'm sure we'll have some time for more comments and discussion. Mr. Tanner.
The best news I can tell you is that I'm not letting any education bills. Well, like everyone else in the legislature, we all know that education is important to people. Any survey you do, it's going to say education right up at the top. There's a concern for a lot of the parents and grandparents. I think the only time I've ever seen that get bumped off was when they were going to move the prison to West Jordan. And that one did dislocate that one for a little while. But the rest of the time it goes back into a kind of steady state. Everybody's concerned about education. My expertise is not education. My expertise lies in other areas. And for me, I spend a lot of time on social services appropriations. And there's a lot of money that's going on there. You may think that it has nothing to do with education, but the fact is that when you start talking about the financial level, it's all interconnected. We're talking about Healthy Utah. It's something you've probably heard about. Healthy Utah is going to be costing us, if we do it, will cost the state an extra $80 million per year, meaning about 2021. If we do it the way we've done the other Medicaid expansions, we'll be going from about $680 million state dollars per year to about $760 state dollars per year by doing Healthy Utah. Now, there's a lot to recommend Healthy Utah. I mean, as a better integrated program for how you approach the health of our community, there's a lot to say for it, especially mental health and what's happening in our jails and and the people with substantial mental illness problems. But then you have to answer that question, where's the $80 million come from? Now, we were just having a discussion about that today in the caucus. The amount that Medicaid has been taking out of the state general funds has risen from about, I think it was about 15% to about 23% currently. That's likely to get bigger before we get done. When we fund these social welfare programs, the money comes from some of this. And as I think you all understand, there's a bridge between the general fund and the education funds, and that bridge is higher education, because we can move things back and forth through that. So as we give more of the general funds to social welfare programs, what we're doing in effect is we're going to be touching on the public education funds, one way or the other. So I would simply offer this as a thought. It's nothing about a new program. It's nothing about testing whether it's appropriate. But if we want to get a little thought to what's happening over in the social services side, we might want to consider whether or not we want to segregate the monies that we're paying for Medicaid programs from other monies. How would you do that? Currently, we're paying for them out of general fund, which is typically mostly sales tax. What we've done through the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, is we have made our insurance premiums taxes. That's just been the net effect of it. If you don't pay your insurance premiums, you're going to get in trouble. They'll penalize you in 1 or 5 different ways. But we've made them taxes. Now, if we're going to make those things taxes on us, can we find a way to make it something like a user fee that we consider for transportation? Remember, transportation is one of the big things we've been talking about also. Also eats into the general. There's been a discussion about whether or not we should be putting that in sales taxes or whether we should be putting something that's more user-related, like the gasoline tax. I'm sure you've read the same newspaper articles I've been reading. I think that there are some things that we can do to move the Medicaid costs into our insurance premiums, and in that sense make it more of a user fee and a little more responsive to pressures that are going on there. If we could do that, and at the moment I have to tell you there isn't the political will to do it, but if we could do that, we would start to segregate that important growing piece of the social welfare programs into a segment where perhaps we get a little better handle on it, and perhaps impinge a little less on our public education funds. I'm one that advocates for provider taxes. Is that because I expect the providers to carry all of this? I think if we put things in provider taxes, what will happen is that they will show up in our premiums, right? And that other tax that we're now paying, the premium tax. And in doing that, we can keep it a little better under control. It does another thing that's good too. Because if our providers in the medical community are contributing to the cost of the Medicaid program, they have an incentive to participate in the Medicaid program. And that is one of the core problems that we have in Medicaid now. We can give them insurance, we can say, congratulations, here's your Medicaid card. But they have a difficult time getting people to actually provide services for that. A provider tax, that they can see some of their money is going out to pay for the Medicaid charges that are coming in, gives them an incentive to participate in the program. Now, does that answer all your problems in education? Of course not. It's another piece of the pie. But it's the piece that I get more involved in than I do indirectly into education. If there are any questions you'd like to ask me, I'm glad to answer them. I'm not going to have the erudition of someone that I'm sitting up here with. But I can tell you that I understand that education is important to people in my district. And that's a very, very common characteristic of everybody's district, I think, the legislature. Thank you. Please.
I actually have a question for all of you. You talk about charter schools being innovations or laboratories of innovation. I've been amazed at how our school community councils, as I've visited those, are using trust fund lands to come up with innovative ideas on how to address problems at their school level. And it's been amazing to see how they're tracking their results and they're seeing positive results for their specific school. I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we can better tap into school trust fund lands and what the long-term usage of those trust fund lands, because I believe there's great power and value in passing those to community councils and allowing those to solve in-school issues.
I think I can answer that. I've been in the middle of that in the last 2 years, sat on a task force that we've changed how the trust fund money is being managed. We're in the process of hiring a chief investment officer and full-time staff. Should have that done hopefully this spring. The bill should be numbered tomorrow. We are looking at moving the cap from 2% to 5% because we have bumped up against that because of the growth of the Sitla Trust Fund money as well as the revenues that have been coming in. So that bill is coming because I believe the purest money that we have is the school trust fund money. And as it continues to be managed and to grow, as we did some of our projections 5 and 8 years out, that the middle school next to my house on 2700, that instead of I think it's roughly 96,000 they got last year, I think Susan and the community council, we would be looking at about $250,000 to $300,000, and if in 5 year, a high school like Bingham would be close to $750,000. That money is where parents get involved, it goes there, and as I've sat in those, and I know these gentlemen will say, having the parents control that money with the plan that's out there. It's not a quick fix, but I will tell you the long-range plans, as I've looked at it, that we could be much like South Dakota that has an $8 billion surplus because of having all of their lands, and which gets into the trust, not just the school trust fund money, but all of the lands in the federal, and it's, taking back control. But that is there. It's a great way. I know that there was some question that charter schools aren't treated, that they're treated differently than what our traditional schools are, and if we looked at that is not true. They do go through the same plan. You have 90% of the charter schools that the parents are involved in that. You have the other 10%, the way the charters are set up, and that plan has to then go and it heads upstream, right up here to your other elected officials that theirs doing. But I'm hopeful because I would love to see, and I know every teacher in here would say, man, I'd like to have one paraeducator sit in my class. How about we get to the point and have 4 and 5 and 6? Because I'm also a realist. There's no way that we can build schools fast enough to take care of the growth that we have on the west side, or even in the state. The large classrooms are not going to just shrink overnight. That's a false hope. It's just not going to happen. But if we could put 2, 3, and 4 paraeducators, and this kind of goes to my post-retirement bill, use those trained people back in to help you teachers to take a group of 4 or 5 kids that are behind in math and language and the spelling and those things. That's where my hope is. So we're online. The bill should be numbered tomorrow. Everybody's in. I hope we can get the Senate, because we bumped up against that cap. I didn't know if you knew that, Senator. That we bumped up against the 2. It's headed to the 5, and it'll be coming. I'm the House sponsor, and then it's coming over to the Senate. And Senator Urquhart, if I'm not mistaken, is the.
So are you optimistic that can get through this session?
We're going from the 2 to the 5.
And that can get through this session, you think? Or?
It'll pass.
Okay.
I think I I can't, we bumped up against, we're gonna do it, and if that fund continues to grow and the revenue's coming in. Downside is we've had a big major shift with oil prices and energy prices in the basin, because if you go to Vernon right now, it's almost a ghost town. So we've kind of gone from one extreme to another extreme, so it's there. And I am hopeful in 5 years, our projections, if I'm half right, we can really help the teachers and the parents get that money to where it needs to be. When I saw them build a lab with computers in that junior high, and to have the parents involved, it was fun to be part of that process, quite frankly. Yes?
I just have one comment on your bill in terms of making the structural changes, not just in terms of the distribution of those funds, but how those funds are managed is significant. We have been managing, and I'm in the investment world too, as Rich is, Representative Cunningham.
Rich is fine.
Yeah, Rich, not like Rich. But we've been managing these funds very conservatively, and this is a long-term fund, right? This is something that's going to provide future funding for multiple generations. And so some of these changes that have been made, hiring a sophisticated investment person to manage these funds, broadening the investment options that you have, is going to also add a lot to that over the time period. 10, 20 years down the road, the compounding benefits of that are significant. So I really applaud the efforts that you made in that bill to really enhance what the capabilities are of that fund.
And there is still major legislative oversight. Once we do have a chief investment officer and that full-time staff in place, it still comes back to us on an annual basis for reporting and accountability on there. It's no longer in the hands of the treasurer. So excited about that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask Senator Osmond, first of all, congratulations on 97 getting somewhere. I know you've been working on that for some time. What is your expectation as it goes across?
Well, I think that the challenge that we have in the House is that the House has never heard this bill proposed. It's always gotten through the Senate in the past, different versions of this, but it hasn't been in the House yet in a meaningful way. But there's been so much ambient noise about it, so much conversation in the hallways. There's a large awareness of the bill, but they haven't actually had it presented. So I have to go figure that out, spend some time with my colleagues in the House Education Committee, where it's likely to be assigned, and figure out the next steps. I'm still very optimistic. I think that there's a recognition of a very real problem. The representatives of the various parts of the state get that problem. So I'm quite optimistic that it will pass this year.
Well, Dan's not here, but he's in that education committee, so we would be tied to do this. So.
Yeah. And then I think it's important for all of you not to forget how much influence that you can have. You need to reach out to your elected representatives over here and let them know that this is important to you and that they need to take a stand on it. And so it's a collective effort. We need to work together to ensure this type of legislation can get passed.
Can you talk about the impact of SB1? Like, if one passes, does that affect you?
Well, we did actually a substitute bill today that does what is called a coordination clause. It aligns the two bills if they both pass so that they will reflect the financial impacts in SB1, which is, for those of you that don't know, SB1 is the funding bill for public education.
And that one's rolling fast?
SB1, well, SB1 is, the base budget is passed. We have to come back and make modifications to it at the end of session when we know the final numbers.
Can we get possible one in a second?
Sure.
Representative Coleman's bill,
Representative Coleman's bill.
unlicensed, allowing
The licensure.
principals to, yeah, right.
I have a lot of opinion on this.
Well, I'd love to hear it.
I've talked to this many people, I really don't need to hear this. I have the example I kept hearing is, people with MBAs, people with MBAs. Well, it doesn't say people with MBAs, it doesn't say people with certain degrees, it just says non-education degrees. And that's a really big concern. We have licensure for a reason, we go through the hoops that we go through, not to
the House Committee.
Pat?
Actually, she used me in presenting that bill because I was principal of the year, and I'm sure Todd Corman would like an MBA in his school by one of his administrators. And it's in her notes. There isn't one thing here at Copper Hills that's not true. Very little here do I need an MBA to handle. I need administrators that understand core curriculum, testing students, how to form relationships with kids, scholarships, on and on and on. So though I appreciate what Representative Coleman is saying, her kids attend here and I never want to offend her, but I do not need an MBA on my administration team.
Yeah, me to answer that? An MBA does not make an individual. There was, when we were looking at the qualifications of a chief investment officer and some of those things, they're probably some of the greatest money managers in the United States do not have MBAs. There are certain categories. I mean, you know, that's out there. I don't want an MBA person doing a CTE program to learn how to weld. I don't think you need that qualification, but I agree. I don't know what the appetite's going to be as it gets to the House floor. I think we want a qualified person. They need the credentials in there. In our industry, it's a certified financial analyst, which is more important probably than an MBA.
And I think one of the other arguments
Yeah.
is that there's going to be a shortage, like if you're coming up with an educator shortage, and then that's going to lead to an administrative shortage. Well, can we address the issues that are causing the shortage instead of just opening the floodgates, like unqualified people? Like, will you guys represent us? Please?
Yes.
Just behind you.
UEA is opposed to it, and once again, I feel like you're trying to legislate something that should be left in the state school board's hands. They handle licensure, and there are places that I would like to see I would like to see an IT professional handling some of our infrastructure. I would love to see our property acquisition person to be in real estate. But I'm not sure that on an administrative level, that is helpful at all. I think Canyons District has shown what it's like to have someone come in from industry to lead the district. In my opinion, that was not a success.
Time for a couple more? Yes.
I would just like to go back to the SB 97 and Senator Stevenson, your comment that you made about equality and inequality, and tie that into grading schools, particularly low-income and Title I schools. I am a South Jordan resident, and I'm so happy that I live in my wonderful neighborhood. I teach in West Valley, and at a Title I school with extraordinary poverty. And we are a D. We would give our left arm for a B. Twice. Both of our arms. We would be so thrilled if in our grading we could get a B. We work with children who are coming to us from extreme things that no one in this room, I pray, has ever experienced. And they come to school every single day to be safe and to be loved by their teachers and to hopefully learn something along the way. And we have a D. And we had a D last year, and we will probably have a D again next year because our students come to us under such duress every day. We have kids that move in and move out and go here and go there because they don't have a place to live. They're homeless. We have students that go to charter schools and then the charter school on the corner kicks them out and sends them back to us because they beat their teacher up. We have students who physically abuse the teachers in our building. There is a teacher in my building who, I hope she never knows I say this, she has PTSD because a first grader beat her up so severely and there was no support for her. And we have a D. And we have a school that loves our kids and our teachers are there every single day. We have merit pay hanging over our heads, and and we are not bad teachers. We are amazing, probably some of the very best teachers. And we have merit pay hanging over our heads, and now we have this, oh, if you're a failing school, maybe you're going to turn into a charter school and then you'll lose your job. So that's just our impression, that's what we're thinking. And I just want to know what you think about that. That is the epitome of equality and inequality. That is SB 97. That comes down to, you've got your rich kids in Park City, and you've got your immigrant kids in West Valley. That is SB 97. That is the epitome of inequality in the state of Utah. And you've got the best teachers working with those kids every single day. And we pull and we prod and we teach and we try to get them to school. We have a second grader who won't go to school, so he won't come to class. And all we can do is have a behavior aide follow him around, as he will not go to class because he is oppositionally defiant, and he will not go to class, and we're going to be graded on him. And there is not one thing we can do about it. And we need some help. And we do not want to be a D school. We do not want to fail. But when you talk about SB 97 and you talk about equality and inequality in schools, that is it. That is your rich kids and that is your poverty. We would kill for a B, we would kill for a C. We're probably always going to be a D because those are our kids. And we can't change where we are. So I want to know, what do you think about failing schools and merit pay and grading teachers who work their asses off every single day to help these kids who we just can't get them up to grade level no matter what we do, because their moms and dads are working 3 jobs, they don't speak any English, they don't have books in their houses, they come to school at 6:30 a.m., some of them stay until 5:30 p.m. Their parents drop them off at 6:30 in the morning. School starts at 8. And those are our kids. That's a generation of kids that we're losing. And you've got a generation of teachers who are working so hard to help them. And all we hear is failing, 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 failing. And we are not failing school.
Well, let me just respond from Senator Osmond's perspective. And
we've spoken about this in email.
I recognize That's why I responded. First comment I want to make is, you're right. The purpose behind funding equity is to ensure that those types of schools receive adequate funding to be able to address the very difficult challenges that they're facing. English as a second language, transient students, students that have behavior and emotional problems, special education, etc. So I recognize that need, and funding is a critical element. If we've heard anything from all the education task force meetings that we've attended, it is when there's great leadership and great teachers with adequate funding to address their local needs, they will solve the problems. They will do it. And they don't need us to tell them how to do it. They just need the funding and the support. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons why I backed off of my failing school bill was because President Dieter, was because of feedback from fantastic teachers all over the state saying, wait a minute, we get you want to solve the failing school problem, but that's not the answer. The answer, Senator, is to help us. Give us additional resources and give us support. Give us financial support and training and professional development support, and help us let us solve our problem with those resources. Mm-hmm. So President Niederhauser is actually working on a piece of legislation right now to address that very issue, to provide additional funding and resource support for our failing schools so that they can address the unique challenges that they have. That's part one. But then there's the whole issue of the social dynamic. You know, I've been paying attention to what the United Way has been doing with some of our most needy Title I districts, and it's really impressive to me. What they've done is they've brought in a resource. They're paying for a resource to come in and take the burden off the principal and to be there as a resource with all the different social programs that are available in our state to help that particular school and the parents and the kids at that school so that they can address nutrition, mental and physical wellness, safety issues, and provide the support for those kids to be able to be in an environment where they can even learn at all. So I think we recognize some of those issues, and we're trying to grapple with, okay, we've created this grading school system. There are reasons behind that. We don't need to go into that now. But we never identified what we would do when we identified that a school was failing. And we're working on that now, trying to figure out how do we support, not penalize, how do we support those schools? So I thank you for your feedback. I agree with everything that you said. I'm anxious about it. I don't know what
Would
to
you
do.
write that down?
Yes. It's so noted. It's
Thank
very
you.
noted.
Can I get a-
And I appreciate it. And I'm happy to spend some more time with you to talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
All right, last question, and then we have to.
Just similar along those lines with the grading and whatnot, and apparently I missed some of the conversation earlier about the SAGE testing. My understanding is that schools will not be penalized for children or parents who opt their children out of taking the SAGE testing. I live in Riverton. I have several neighbors that go to various different charter schools. And one of the board of directors from one of those charter schools had indicated that they were slightly penalized with their grade because they had fewer than 95% of the students take the SAGE test. Is that really happening, and how are we going to address that? Because me as a parent, if I want to opt my kid out of SAGE testing, it's not the teacher's fault, it's not the administrator's fault, and the school and teacher should not be penalized for that.
Yeah, that's correct. Sorry, this is mine as well.
Did I tell you what my wife said?
Yeah.
No, I think you already know.
Oh, yeah, I do know. She didn't like it. So, here's the answer, that when we passed the Parents' Rights Bill, we said in that bill that the state board shall form a rule to ensure that teachers and schools were not penalized when a student opted out. What we did not anticipate was situations like in Alpine School District, where more than 25% across the district opted out. Or in some charter schools, as many as 75% of the parents opted their kids out. So it's a problem we did not anticipate. And we're trying to figure that out in partnership with the State Board of Education. I just presented on this to the State Board of Education last week, saying, what do we do, guys? How do we handle this issue? Now, one answer is what Dennis Randall's talking about. You can eliminate SAGE testing altogether and avoid this problem. And that is a solution. You know, my stand on this issue is that I think that there is a value in having some tools that can be provided by the state to support assessment, not to mandate assessment. That was my support of state testing. But at the end of the day, we have to solve this problem, and the simplest solution is to get rid of it. That's the simplest solution. But I don't know if that answers your question. I'm happy to spend some more time afterwards just knowing the time. Hopefully that's a good enough answer.
I just want to thank you for coming, but I want to take a moment and thank these gentlemen up here. I have spent time with them for the last 4 years, and I have enormous respect. Do I always agree with them? No, I do not. And usually they know I don't agree with them on various issues. But I have enormous support for each one of them because I have come to find and to know the tremendous sacrifice they make to do this job. From their career, from their families, they make a tremendous sacrifice. They can get, targets of bad jokes and things like that quite often. But we need to thank them and we need to appreciate what they do and the time that they spend. And we appreciate the fact that they came tonight. Because the fact that they were willing to come and to listen to answer our questions and to listen to our comments, which are sometimes pointed, is enormous to me as well. So we just want you to know that we appreciate everything that you do.
And also, I think that your state school board and your local school board here with the superintendent, you need to know that they care. And you're right, we don't always agree on some issues, but we're trying to get it right. And coming from an individual that gets to go home and see my wife, who I left this morning at 6:30, I'll get to hear about her. Actually, I had several texts how her day went in school anyway. But when it comes to teachers, don't ever feel that you're not appreciated. Believe me, being raised by a school teacher, I mean, sometimes it's thankless. I believe that we need to put the teaching back in the hands of the teacher and do whatever we can. We're trying to do everything we can this year with the WPU and some of the other things. And I told you, at the very beginning, I didn't appreciate the governor saying, we got to have this. because it's just not that much money to go around, and it really put us, and it's put us on the hook, because I hear, well, the governor said, well, you know, that's his opinion, but it's difficult, and they're not easy choices on some of the things that we have to do, but believe me, when it comes to teaching, and it takes all of us to be involved in that, and we're doing what we can as a group to continually move this, because there's some real out-of-the-box thinking right now that's going on, and I appreciate these two gentlemen. I appreciate Earl too, but the expertise here that these guys have, it's just not his expertise, and it's not mine. But these two gentlemen are doing and thinking outside the box and fighting, and I do appreciate what you've done, what they've done. And please, teachers, go home, let you know that we appreciate everything you do, and it does, the voices don't go unnoticed on it.
And you did receive, you received one of these tonight. You can look at it. This is just showing you how Jordan District is faring in the change for local replacement taxes in charter schools. Also, your board wrote, Jordan School District Board wrote a letter to some legislators. We sent one to our legislators as well as the state board and so on, regarding some issues that we feel about transparency and accountability in terms of the way the property tax funding is done. If you have not seen this and you would like it, I have one. Please feel free to take one. So thanks for coming.